Boris Johnson's future looks bleak.
But I don't think it's even just...
Then we can think that...
What would you look for through today's
economies at the end of the day?
Get ready to delve into the looming economic crisis that threatens the world. Many economists are predicting widespread economic collapse, and the rising rates of inflation are certainly not helping. Join us as we find out how this might be the biggest economic collapse. First, let us look at the state of the global economy. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, economists painted a grim picture, with a staggering 2/3 of them predicting a global economic downturn in 2023. The World Bank echoes this sentiment and warns that we're standing on the brink of an economic crisis. But wait, there's a glimmer of hope. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, offered a more positive perspective, suggesting that we may dodge a recession after all. However, the IMF did issue a cautionary note for the United Kingdom, predicting that their economy will shrink. And for the United States, the IMF indicated that it has only a narrow path to avoid the same fate. But what is pushing us towards economic doomsday? The IMF, the World Bank, and a horde of experts all have their eyes on a single factor that could send us all crashing into a recession: the drastic interest rate hikes imposed by central banks in a desperate attempt to tame the surging inflation. Central banks have the primary role of achieving price stability by controlling the amount of money and credit available in the economy through the interest rate. During the COVID-19 pandemic, they lowered interest rates to encourage borrowing and stimulate economic activity. This move was meant to act like an adrenaline shot. But as economies reopened and spending increased, inflation rates rose to unprecedented levels. To prevent a catastrophic economic collapse, central banks tightened their monetary policy and raised interest rates to slow down borrowing and control inflation. And now the interest rates have gone through the roof. In early 2022, the US Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank hit the brakes on the economy by raising interest rates. Since then, the US Fed has jacked up rates by a whopping 4.5 percentage points, with the most recent hike on February 1st, 2023. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank has hiked rates by 2.5 percentage points. But these hikes pale in comparison to Brazil's sharp increase of 11.75 percentage points since March 2021 and Sri Lanka's rise of 10 percentage points. Why the sudden change in interest rates, you ask? Well, central banks are trying to control inflation by reducing consumer demand. The idea is that if people hold off on making big purchases like a new car or a vacation, the prices of these goods and services won't rise as quickly. However, this approach is like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It ends up affecting everyone by increasing the cost of money for both households and businesses. Despite the bluntness of this monetary policy tool, it does appear to be working in some countries. In the US, for example, inflation has come down significantly from a 4-decade high of 9.1% in June 2022 to 6.5% in December. But the story doesn't end there and certainly does not get better. Interest rate hikes have ominous consequences for the economy. As the cost of borrowing goes up, companies are forced to put the brakes on investments and reduce their workforce. The workers that drive the economy are left with no choice but to swallow this bitter pill. As prices continue to rise, people demand better wages. Higher wages are a positive sign for individuals, but it creates a ripple effect that feeds into expenses for companies. To compensate for the increased cost of production, firms increase prices, which then spirals into a negative feedback loop that's enough to put Sharknado to shame. Central banks around the world are fighting tooth and nail to break this spiral and keep the economy afloat. But fear not, Europe has found a way to tackle inflation without tipping the scales into recession. It's a tricky game of balancing the scales, managing inflation without sacrificing economic growth. It may be a painful exercise, but it's essential to avoid a catastrophic economic collapse. But all hope is not lost. Central banks have more tools up their sleeves than even Inspector Gadget to tackle inflation and soften the economic blow. They can use a range of tactics, from adjusting interest rates to managing the money supply and implementing fiscal policy measures like taxation and government spending. But finding the right balance is like trying to wield the Infinity Stones. It requires a delicate touch and a great deal of finesse. The 2023 recession is already bearing an uncomfortable resemblance to the 1981 aid to inflation crisis, which sent shivers down the spines of investors worldwide. But unlike the 2008 recession, which was caused by the housing market collapse this time around, inflation is the culprit. But don't panic just yet. The road ahead may be bumpy, but with effective policy measures, smart investments, and a bit of luck, we can weather this storm and emerge stronger than ever.